New images of Cuba's electronic eavesdropping bases have been captured from space and are believed to be linked to China. This is according to a new report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The report highlights 4 recently upgraded electronic spying facilities in Cuba, including 3 near the country's capital of Havana. These facilities are located in the distant vicinity of at least 7 American military bases in the southeastern seaboard, including the USS Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay. Matthew Funaiole joins me now. He's a senior fellow for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, China Power Project, and is the co-author of the report. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. What do we know about these spy facilities and how involved is China?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for having me on. What we know from looking at quite a few years of satellite imagery is that these 4 sites have changed pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. That includes the expansion of the facilities, instrumentation being moved around, and then lastly, we're actually able to identify a brand new site that hasn't actually been reported yet. And what we're seeing there is a different configuration than at the other locations that may speak a little bit to its mission set. But overall, what we see is that there's a lot of change going on, there's expansion going on, and these are highly secretive and highly guarded facilities, which speaks to what they might be up to.
And do we think that Cuba wouldn't have capacity on its own to stand up this kind of surveillance, and therefore it's got to be backed by China or somebody else? And, well, backed by China, and could it be anybody other than China?
I think China's the prime target here, is the prime suspect here for a couple of reasons. We know from administration official statements last year that China is growing its intelligence footprint in Cuba, is looking to expand that. And Cuba's in the midst of a pretty harsh financial crisis, economic crisis right now. So when you think of expanding and growing facilities, they're likely looking to an external partner to help them with that. And China's the likely fit.
The CBS News sat down with Cuba's foreign minister back in April, and he rejected the claims that China's operating any spy bases in Cuba. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Cuba's a relatively small country, and there are over 100 diplomatic missions in Cuba. None of them have ever seen, including a U.S. embassy, a spy station or any similar to that, or a Chinese squad or platoon or anything of the sort.
Well, he's denying things that doesn't seem to cover what you found. Is that the way it reads to you?
Well, I think there's a few things to kind of pick up on in there. I mean, one is that Cuba doesn't have much interest in revealing what it may or may not be doing at these facilities, especially if they have been set up, at least in part, to spy on the United States. The second is, and this is a really important aspect here, is that these sites, the value that they provide really comes from both the data that's collected, but then also the ways in which that data is interpreted to derive meaning. So even if they were fully operated by Cuban authorities, that information and that data could still be shared with counterparts like China. Every country in the world spies on each other. It's a pretty well-known fact, and it makes a lot of sense for China to have an interest in trying to use Cuba's proximity to the United States to gain valuable intelligence insights into the U.S. military and other aspects of how operations occur, both within and in the general proximity of the United States.
How concerning is this, given what you just said, which is that we all spy on each other and all the rest of it? But, obviously China is America's greatest competitor.
Well, on one hand, the good news is that the U.S. is, does everything in its power to protect its sensitive information and sensitive communications. And so there's that side of it. What I think is really important here is not necessarily concern, but awareness. It's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that great power competition, geopolitical rivalries, that's something that happens somewhere else, right? It happens overseas. It happens in the Pacific. It happens in Europe. But importantly and increasingly, it's also happening in the backyard of the United States. China is interested in expanding its global footprint, and this is just one of the many echoes that we see of that happening. And so when we're thinking about U.S.-China rivalry, it's not just something that's happening in the Pacific, it's also something that's happening closer to home as well.
And very briefly, that brings me to the spy balloon. What do we know about that? Was that a real thing to get spun up about, or is, give us a sense of that seriousness relative to what you've discovered?
Well, I think that the instrumentation that you would see at the facilities in Cuba would offer a lot more granularity than what you would get on a spy balloon. A spy balloon is a little bit hard to control once it's up in the air and can really only kind of follow a specific type of flight path. What I think this gets into, though, is the broader context. It's not just about one facility or one asset or one particular instance. What we're looking at is an environment in which China is trying to learn more about the United States. It's trying to learn more about how the U.S. operates. It's trying to learn more about how the U.S. military operates. And all of those things combined provide us with a little bit more texture into how we should interpret U.S.-China relations going forward.
Matthew Funaiole from CSIS. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you very much.